Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. Excited to be here with you all. We're going to have a really nice session today talking all about building usage. As you all know, in the certification framework, building usage is one of our pillars. So I'm just going to go through a little bit about the framework so that you understand the context. And then we're going to bring some guest speakers on stage from various companies. We have Ubiqisense joining us out of Denmark, hardware company, very much about sensors and software, and how do we get the data necessary to do the analyses that we do. And then we're also have David Auster from Camac Space, which is looking at it more from a consultancy perspective, from the customer perspective. How do we actually organize ourselves and build a way of getting the most out of our property? So let's jump into it. So as I said, Camac Space, Ubiqisense, and Enappgy, three of our partners, all of them working in the space of not only building usage, they do a lot more than that, but they are definitely experts in this space. So we're gonna hear from them and learn all about how to do this better in real estate. The smart building certification itself is not only about technology. We've said that from the beginning, right? It's technology, but it's also how do you use that technology? What are you trying to get out of that technology in order to drive value for your asset? We look at context. We look at the vertical, what type of property it is, what are the value cases, value activities that we're trying to do with that piece of property. What are the value drivers? What's actually impacting the bottom line of different aspects of health, sustainability, well-being, but also financial? What are the motivations from an organization? I think we're going to speak about that a lot today. What are the different possibilities with this technology, and what can we actually get out of it when we do it correctly? And then how do we also bring stakeholders together, right? Some asset classes or some stakeholders are focused on health and well-being. Some are focused on sustainability. Some are just looking at the financial bottom line. And how do we break down those silos and get those stakeholders to speak together? So we're going to be speaking about that. And then we also look at in the certification at governance. What is the leadership involvement? What is the maturity of SMART? What you'll see is in some buildings, it's about getting insight about a certain indoor environment, whereas other buildings are looking at full integration of when you book this room, it sends you an invoice. So what are the different levels of SMART that we're seeing? And based on these partners that we're about to speak to, what are the ones that they're seeing? What are we seeing in the market that is so changing at the moment? Our framework, the five main pillars are building usage. So how well do you have control over your asset? How well do you have insight into your asset? Building performance is about health or about sustainability, energy consumption, water consumption. How well is the building actually performing? Building environment is your health and well-being, your air quality, your sound, your light, making sure that the environment is a healthy and productive place for people. Safety and security is both physical and digital. As we digitize these buildings more and more, the cybersecurity is definitely something we need to keep our finger on and make sure that we're doing a good job. But the physical security is also very interesting, right? How well are we surveilling a space? How well do we see how something's being used? And user behavior and collaboration is how well do people find each other, collaborate with each other, but how well do they also interact with the building? What we like to see from the Smart Building certification is how can we, with the least amount of technology, impact all of these different areas. So today we're talking about building usage as a theme, really talking about occupancy management, digital assistants, giving people, an app in their pocket and being able to, get information from them. How do we manage and measure and use amenities in a meaningful way, track assets, create user perception? But the technologies and the processes and the things we're talking about today can, of course, impact all of those other areas. So we're going to dive into it. And without further ado, we're going to talk to Pale and David and Antonio if he's here. And let's go. Pale, how are you?
Good. How are you, Nicholas?
I'm good. I'm good. David, how are you?
Hi, Nicholas. I'm well. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm much better now that I'm here with the two of you. So why don't we start with a bit of around the table? Pale, why don't we start with you? Just give an introduction to yourself, who you are, but also your organization and what you guys are all about.
Definitely. Yeah, thanks for having me, Nicholas. It's a pleasure. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Ubiqisense. We're a six-year-old company. We started out, I would say, as a pure occupancy sensor company, and the first thing that we actually did was an integration into building management systems, so you could use live occupancy data to start controlling energy sources in buildings. 5 years ago, that was apparently not a hot topic, so we ventured into the whole space utilization area, started building a cloud platform with strong analytics on top of our sensor devices. And so now, on the other side of COVID, and with the energy crisis in Europe in particular, we're actually seeing sort of a double interest in what we do, in that, energy prices have gone through the roof, and so companies are starting to look at how they can reduce energy also on a daily basis. And at the same time, companies are starting to look at cost of operating their buildings, and so understanding in more detail how those buildings are being used in every type of space is something which is high on the agenda, while at the same time you need to make sure that you have a good user experience, because otherwise people will not come back from or come into the office from and work from home instead. So it's really interesting times for us and the solution that we have.
Yeah, amazing. And you just hit on all of those other parts of the certification that we're talking about, right? Like the power of managing the space in a meaningful way, you can impact all of that other stuff. And it starts with strong data and strong technology to make that happen.
Yeah.
So really great to have you here. And so funny that you start by saying, 5 years ago, they weren't interested in the optimization of energy and these types of things. And now that's almost core. It's almost the most important piece.
Exactly.
And David, nice to have you here. Can you introduce yourself and let everybody know what you're about?
Thank you. Once again, thank you for having me, Nicholas. Thank you for presenting yourself, Paul. Nice to hear about Ubiqisense. We are Camac space. We specialize in strategy and advisory within commercial real estate. We have been doing so for the last 3 to 4 years. We are extremely interested in technology and potential of its impacts in the real estate industry in creating more sustainable environments for investors, for occupiers, from different stakeholders. So we've been on two sides of the coin, I would say. One, advising investors what to do with their real estate and how to improve them in terms of obviously efficiency. Energy efficiency at the moment, I would say it's one of the priorities, as Paul said, mostly due to the energy prices. But on the other hand, also how to increase revenues and make them more desirable for the market, where we see the biggest changes where the buildings are healthier, I would say, so following the well-being for their occupants. And on the other side, we advise organizations, so clients in particular, about their commercial real estate portfolios. So that's where we actually need occupancy and space utilization analytics to decide what to do, when to do, how to do it, and to dictate, basically make decisions based on data. But for that, you need a really good pipeline and network of stakeholders that can support you, obviously, in acquiring that data. So that's us in a nutshell.
Really nice. And I see Antonio just joined us. I see he's muted, but maybe he'll come off of mute and then he can introduce himself. We're just in the introductory round, so that's perfect. Enappgy, Antonio Vega. Nice to
Hi,
meet you.
guys.
There you are. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
Apologies for the delay. I'm working currently remotely, and the internet can be challenging. Yes, my name is Antonio Vega from the company Enappgy. We are a software solutions company specialized in smart buildings. We have a modular platform that can be easily integrated into buildings to enable our partners, installation companies, engineering companies, advisors, etc., to deliver these new so-called smart services, like smart contracts for the energy for the end users, and using data like occupancy to deliver more value and another services for our partners.
Really nice to have you here. And the reason we have all three of you guys here, you guys all are actually very kind of different stakeholders, right? Like Ubiqisense is very much the hardware sensor technology. Antonio's looking very much from a software perspective. How do you actually make sense of the data? And then David is actually communicating that technology or that data, that insight to customers in the consultancy aspect. And of course, you guys all do a bit of all of that. But I wanted to talk about building usage or how to manage the usage of a building better from these kinds of different perspectives. I think that that's a really important thing to do. And let's start from the deep technology side to Pale and move up all the way to the user experience. What is the ideal kind of infrastructure to have in place for a building to be able to manage its usage, and why is that important?
So I think that what's becoming important now is to be able to monitor occupancy with a high level of granularity in all types of spaces in a building. I think, again, if we look back some years, you might have a number of desks, equaling the number of employees. Everyone had their own desk, and then you had an appropriate number of meeting rooms, and the building was sort of laid out and outfitted based on some sort of template, and employees just had to fit into that. Now, with big companies and small companies, small companies struggling to get the employees back, they're starting to look at the user experience, and they're starting to realize that they have to adapt the facilities to the needs of the users rather than the other way around. And so for that, companies are starting to put in all types of different spaces because they also realize that people don't come in and work every. Sorry, I'm just kind of a bit distracted.
Yeah, we got a little bit of noise coming from you, Antonio, I think.
I'll put it.
So people are not coming in the old-fashioned way. They come in to do interaction, collaboration, and so on and so forth. And companies start to put in new types of spaces. And it's just really important to monitor how those spaces are performing. But it's also important to monitor how the old type of spaces are performing. And if I can just give an example, so one of our customers, as we do many places, we're monitoring space utilization in meeting rooms. And the way I used to put it is that before COVID, if you had 10 people invited for a meeting, you'd have 10 people in that meeting room. During COVID, there would be no one there. And after COVID, you don't actually know. It can be anything between 0 and 10, right? And so you need to actually measure that in order to see if your facilities is outfitted the way it should be to the new needs of the users. And if it isn't, you should really adapt. And so what we're seeing, as one example, in the co-working space here in Copenhagen, the average space utilization is between 25 and 30%, depending on how attractive the meeting room is, for example. And so that creates a tremendous waste of energy, especially ventilation. You're over-ventilating everything. but also creates a lot of empty square meters that are not used properly. And so, but by providing the detailed and occupancy data with a very high level of granularity, you can actually then start to do something about that. And I think that's what we're going to see the next probably year or two. Companies starting to adapt based on this granular occupancy data that we, for example, can provide.
Really nice, really nice. And Antonio, from a technology perspective, what would you add to that? What is the ideal kind of infrastructure that needs to be in place in order to manage, measure, and optimize usage?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Pali was saying. The only thing that I could add is for end users, and the companies delivering the services, they have to be careful on the hardware as well. I mean, we're a software company, but we constantly see this challenge, or how do you come to the data? And sometimes if the wrong hardware is installed, or let's say not an open hardware, or not flexible enough, or not scalable enough, you can do everything with your software, but you are not going to get the results. And that's during the implementation of the project, but also in the long term. You don't want to have a lock-in in the future for the end user. So you want to make sure that the hardware that you're going to be integrating with is going to be there at least for the next 5-10 years. So that's kind of the risk of now all the technologies that are coming mostly in the European countries. Many new sensor manufacturers, and there's a risk attached to that, even though they can deliver what they say. And that's something that the end user and the entire DMU should consider, at least in terms of the right infrastructure, Nicolas.
And how do you validate that hardware?
There's nothing better than testing it on site. Of course, it helps if the hardware is manufactured by big companies that they are going to have a backup in case something happens in the future. But during the implementations, it's really important to consider maybe a pilot test where you can define and you can decide the hardware that better fits the project. Whether it is already on site, that is mostly that will be the ideal scenario, or additional hardware that you need in order to achieve the functionalities you want.
Yeah. And yeah, before we move to David, just to give Pale a second to respond to that, how do you recommend that companies, besides only choosing Ubiqisense, validate and choose their hardware?
No, I think Antonio is absolutely right. You need to make sure that you have something that is future-proof and that can sit there for the next 5 to 10 years. And one of the things that we're seeing a little bit somewhere is that certain companies are rushing to put in something that seems to be quick and easy to install. It may be battery powered, sensors, and they may promise you a 2-year battery lifetime. In reality, it may be only 6 months, and then you end up in a cycle where you have to replace those batteries all the time. So I can only agree with Antonio, and go in it for the long haul and don't try to rush to quick fix solutions.
Yeah, and I would just add to one piece to that as well. What we're seeing in certification is there's a different level of maturity when it comes to smart, right? So if you're looking for insight, as an example, CO2 levels or occupancy levels, and you're just looking to populate a software platform, there's very little risk when something goes down. And so if a battery goes out, the risk is lower. But what we're seeing is the maturity of smart is increasing to the point where these sensors are no longer just giving you insight, they're actually triggering business process. Mm-hmm. And if they're triggering business process, you can't let those things fall over. You can't have that risk. That risk is too high. So I think you hit it on the head when consciously think about the options and don't necessarily take the easy way, but think about the longevity and think about the dependability of those.
If I may add, is also important to consider that it may seem, and we can see that frequently in our projects. It may seem that you save maybe 2%, maybe 5% of the costs of the investment because the sensor of X, Y, W company is cheaper, but the impact in the long term is huge. So the only thing that I'd like to add is that consider that not for saving a couple of euros at the front of the project, you can have really, like you said, the impact in processes in the long term, and that's going to can be even millions. So just consider that.
Yeah, really, really nice addition. And I think we need to talk more about that, because I think when it comes to organization and what we're doing with the asset, it plays into those decisions as well. So David, moving to you, moving more to, the interface between the technology and the humans actually using this technology. What needs to be in place from an organizational perspective in order to make that a reality? What's the infrastructure from a human side?
Maybe I would start a little bit differently, if I may.
My co-founder likes to do that as well. She says, I'm going to answer the question that I think you should have asked me. And I go for it.
Thank you. So what Para and Antonio said, it works very nicely. Just one thing I would point out, so let's say going very practically here, at the moment, we've been doing a lot of studies and researches for clients before they make strategic decisions. So for those, they're willing to take lesser information or lesser quality of information. So retrofitting sensors as much as they can to gather information before they move forward to make alteration within the space or on a whole portfolio, if it might be. So whatever is dictating their future of work, let's say, if we're talking specifically about organizations and whether they're going to work hybrid and flexible, then they want to start gathering data once they deploy it. And for that data, I would say at the moment, I think the easiest one is usually tends to be access control. That's in most of the cases that's in place. Second one that we see quite often is room booking, not necessarily utilization of a room, but those two, most of the offices will have them. Then other sensors, it varies, and I would say less than more, especially in the older buildings. So that's where you would like to get Ubiqisense in and install it and deploy it as a quicker solution. So maybe for half a year as a pilot, just to gather that baseline data so you can start making decisions. Because as soon as you have certain patterns, yes, they will change, but at some point you also have to draw a line and make a decision going forward. So once you have that, then you formalize your strategy based on data that you required. And then when you go into implementation, new space, I think that's where we should start talking about long-term decisions. That's where it comes. We're making investment for, let's say, next 5 years. We want to be flexible. We want to have data on hand at all times that is reliable, that is not battery-driven, but that's a wired, however you want to do it. So I think those are the major changes. And also for that, you need somebody behind the scenes who understands the integrated workplace management system in this particular case and data numbers. So they're also looking at the meeting rooms. If the utilization is, 6 out of 10 and never more than 7, they can probably drop down at the sizes. But they have to make those decisions because otherwise it's just data for the sake of data. I think that's never great. And when we look at also when you said from Ubiqisense, you're gathering if somebody is roomed or not, I think here also comes, let's say, CO2 sensors, which should drive how much oxygen gets pumped in. So I think overall at the moment, most of the buildings are extremely stupid, if you ask me, and we are not even starting yet properly. But I think in next, I wouldn't say 2, I think in next 15 to 20 years, we have hell of a lot to do to come first to smart and then maybe at some point to intelligent. However, at the same time, I would also like to point out that I've picked up on what what you said, Nicholas, about triggering business process. I think that's where we're getting ahead of ourselves. When we don't have things figured out completely yet, and we are already pushing it to a little bit further, but it makes sense because it's making money. That's the only.
No, but I mean, we've seen buildings that are doing that, you know.
Yeah.
And Pale's technology is in one of the buildings that is doing that, and it's really interesting. It's what we see is that the buildings that are kind of getting started with smart and are just stepping into it for the first time, they see efficiency in every area, right? What you measure, you manage, and what you manage, you can improve. So, you know, the air quality, if it gets managed, then they put focus on it. Energy consumption, the same thing. So those companies that are starting out, they're getting incremental improvements in all of those areas, which is great. But the companies that have been doing this for 6-7 years, as long as Ubiqisense and Enappgy have been around, you know, they're starting to reimagine the business process and the value of these technologies, to the point where when we've asked, you know, what's the square meter price you expect to get from this smart building, they laugh and they say we're playing a different game. You know, we're reinventing real estate, and that's of course the minority. But you know, if that deems successful, if it shows that it's a valid thing, then it's coming, right? It's a no-brainer if you can make more with your real estate. So it's really really interesting. So the metrics that you kind of just listed were, you know, occupancy, CO2, kind of energy, these types of things. Pale, what do you think from a metrics perspective? What do you guys tell your customers that they should be trying to measure? And then from the organization perspective, what do you see needs to be in place in order to do something with that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So obviously we recommend our clients to measure occupancy. That's a given, right? That's where we sell. But I think as David says, you know, you also need to measure CO2, temperature, air quality. But I think more and more you also actually need to start measuring sort of qualitative things like how are people doing in this building? How can you couple or combine the hard data with experience data from the users? We're involved in some really interesting projects here where we're outfitting buildings with our sensors and solution combined with people that are experts in you know, collecting data on user experience, and so trying to piece those sets of data together so that you don't just rely on the hard data. And you can make a lot of assumption based on the hard data, but it might also be that you're overlooking something basic like this meeting room nobody wants to use because there's a smell in there, or you know, it's noisy, it's not sufficiently soundproof, things like that. So I think more and more we also need to take, and it comes back into that whole user experience thing, that the user experience is along with energy use, it's probably front and center in what needs to happen in the next 2 or 3 years, because that's how we get people to come back and have those crucial interactions that are so important for companies in the offices.
Yeah, absolutely. And how about you, Antonio? What are the metrics that you guys see as critical when you are managing your usage? And I know that the Enappgy platform goes very far, so you probably have quite a different answer.
Yeah, maybe it's also a bit connected to what David said. At certain point, you have to make a decision, right? I had a customer that, for example, went from paying energy costs 9,000 euros per month to 21,000 euros per year. 21,000 euros per year. So the market is changing a lot, and what we recommend is to start by energy. Please talk to your smart building advisor, or find a way to first tackle that. Let's say more feasible goal, that is making the building energy efficient. And then you can move to the other, like you said, primary processes, interventions of data interactions. So from our perspective, energy is first. If you don't have a building that is energy, it doesn't make any sense to start talking about room booking or asset tracking inside or alerts, etc. First, making the energy building, building energy efficient, even energy neutral. That's what we are trying to achieve in multiple of our projects. And after that, you can go and move forward to another solutions.
So how do you do that in relation to building usage? As we bring that back to the building usage topic of occupancy management and amenity usage, and these types of things, how do you guys bring those together, energy and?
Yeah, the first one will be to talk about HVAC and lighting. So that's the core, and solar panels. So the combination or heat pumps. So the combination and integration of those, so the production and the consumption, based on detection, both focused. We're talking about occupancy maybe again, but focused in making the energy consumption more efficient. So that will be the first target in our projects. And with that same system, with that same infrastructure, you can grow and move forward to another solutions like the room booking that David mentioned.
Yeah, really nice. And David, do you see it the same way?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Paul and with Antonio. I would just like to split two things. There's landlord and occupiers. I think Paul is more focusing on occupiers, and as I was myself, where you're looking mostly at, obviously you would like to have control about energy efficiency, but that's down to landlord in most of the cases. So it's building you choose is pretty much stuck with, but at the same time, I think landlords are driving that investments to improve their energy efficiency on many different levels. And also I think especially in EU, there's been quite a lot of a Green Deal behind it, so you get incentives to do so. Whereas businesses, they would be predominantly focusing on occupancy, understanding how they use the space. And I really like what Paul said, merging the two, because we've been doing that under the radar. But I see now that Europe is picking up merging data from sensors and user experience. And that's why we have been for these many years, or in these few years, so successful. So understanding user experience of a space, expectations about the work and desires, aligning that with hard facts data, because we live in a parallel worlds, I would say. Most of the employees don't realize they have sick days and holidays and so forth. So they never take it in account in terms of space utilization. And one of the first to understand that was WeWork. They were extremely successful. And their ratio of booking or selling was 1 to 38, and that was at full occupancy. Now with hybrid, we far exceeded. I think now you could go probably 100 desks for 108 employees easily, and you will never be full.
Yeah.
So it's a big shift, but understanding that patterns, drivers, different organizations will have different outlooks and strategies in place for future of work, and I think that's going to drive a lot of it. Because if you force, mandate people to come back like Goldman Sachs did for 5 days a week, that again changes dynamic. If you set it for 4 days, changes dynamic. If you do 3-2, it again alters what you're going to require. And then also different demographics, geographics. I think bigger cities like London and most probably Amsterdam, New York, Paris, they're less desirable to be there every day. Whereas in smaller markets in the office, like Ljubljana, there has been no issue. Yes, let's say in our company in Ljubljana, we have 30 employees. We offer hybrid and flexible, just an example. Office is full every day. Maybe
that's a good sign.
There's two signs. It's not a bad commute. That's one thing I would never underestimate. In London, wherever you move, you take minimum an hour. In Ljubljana, if you live close by, it's 15 minutes. Why would you bother working at home where you can sit in a car, your own car, put on a music, do it for 10, 15 minutes? Maybe it's not the most sustainable yet. We have to turn to electric cars, but it's not that bad. That's what I'm trying to get on.
Absolutely. absolutely. Key. And I really like that you bring in that dynamic of those different stakeholders, right? The owner, the landlord, and the tenant. And what we're also seeing with certification is two real distinct smart cases, right? You have the landlord that is planning on holding on to the building and managing the building, and exactly what they're putting into the smart infrastructure and why they're putting it in and how they're going to use it. And then you have the other one, which is, going to lease it out or sell the property, and they have a much harder time kind of justifying the capex investment to put all that technology in when they don't know necessarily who's going to take on the asset in the future and use it. And I think that there's a huge opportunity there for all of us if we can help to put that value on smart as to exactly how it can be used for that potential owner or potential tenant in the future. Are you guys seeing that as well in your discussions? And how do your customers fit into those? Maybe we'll start with Paula.
Yeah, so we're definitely seeing that some of the larger property owners are starting to realize that there is value for them in occupancy data as well. And one of the key drivers for that, of course, is that lease times are going down. I mean, I guess we're asymptotically going towards space as a service, right? It might take a few years longer than Anthony Slumbus is predicting, right? But that's certainly the trend, right? And the problem, one of the biggest costs for a property owner is if his occupier moves out, right? That's a huge cost. So they see the value in understanding how are their tenants doing, and are they sort of outgrowing the space? Are they sort of shrinking out of the space, if that's a way to put it? And what can be done proactively with that data? And so in some of the conversations that we have with some of the pension funds here making new constructions in Denmark in particular, they want to put in this technology because they realize that there's a lot of value for them in having these insights into how their tenants are going to be doing in those buildings.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you also experiencing the developer who is planning on selling the building and doesn't know what to do, and what do you tell them?
I think that's going to take a little bit longer. We are working with one sort of forward-looking developer who has sort of gotten the idea. I think they will come out of as the winners eventually, right? But I think that the developers, it's going to take a little bit longer before they're going to come around.
Yeah, because you're passing on cost, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you still have these silos, and they just want to deliver something as cheap as possible, and then not really care too much about the operations.
Yeah, and as long as it's not 100% standard practice across the board, there's still a way to mitigate that. Yeah. And Tony, are you seeing the same thing? How are you seeing that?
Yes, it's pretty much similar. Although we have some projects where we have experienced even budget splitting, that the owner pays for the infrastructure, the user pays for the software, and the maintenance company pays for the services. It is still not really common. So indeed, like Palle said, we see also silos. And I will also add that it depends on the market, because the examples of David, of course, are for offices. That's a clearly defined owner, user, and the challenges that he mentioned. If we compare that with, for example, the schools, in the schools, most of the times the owner is the municipality, and the school has no benefits whatsoever in energy savings, let's say, but still there's an obligation, and it's a huge problem, because we're not only talking about, because these are normally old buildings, we're not talking only about energy savings, but also the conditions inside the classrooms for the students. We're talking about, again, people, let's say, building usage here again, or in another kind of way. And the challenge is still here the same. energy savings and current conditions of the building. So even though you have a different stakeholder, the level of necessity for this kind of implementations in schools is different than in offices. So that depends also in the market.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. David, any closing remarks on that one? You started it. We can move on as well.
I would say just maybe I would add that there is a big difference that we have seen in terms whoever is doing it for long-term ownership as opposed to short-term ownership.
Yeah.
It also depends on real estate cycle, fund cycle, and so forth. So pension funds, if they're the investors, maybe it has more leeway because they're going for the long run. But if you have developer/fund, then you have more of a challenge because they're there potentially to build, to sell them to the fund to fill it up, then run it for a couple of years, asset managed, then pass it on to pension fund. So it depends how much of a long game you play, but I would advise, maybe recommend that you have a look at, there are companies that are doing it as developer, asset manager, and potentially landlord for a longer term, which is Corvin. They're doing in Southeast Europe and Central Europe. I think there are a couple in UK too. There are not many yet, but I see that being a thing. And as soon as you change from purely developer to developer plus, you're gonna hold on to building, let's say just for 10 years or 7. That changes their mentality drastically because then they start thinking, okay, we'll have to manage this. How can we simplify it? Maybe the investment is a little bit higher, but they justify it then because they're going to get a higher value and so forth. So I think in long term, that will be the case going forward.
Yeah, no, and I think the local laws and legislation also plays a huge part in that, right? I mean, you have some investment houses that can't get involved in additional services or, charging anything different for kind of the data or the extra things. So that's something that I think is becoming unified as well across the market, which will play it. But that brings me kind of my next question. When we look at these, like I said, the companies that are just getting started with smart, they see incremental improvements everywhere. But the ones that have been going for a long time, they're starting to create completely new business models. And I was wondering if maybe we could go around the table and have a little bit of an inspiration session of what are the things that you guys have seen that are kind of moving the needle in your minds, something that's a unique way of using this technology that people could think about in their own businesses. I mean, if you look at, for instance, I was reading an article, about the continent of Africa, right? They actually skipped laptops and computers and went directly to mobile phones, right? So I think we're going to see that happen in real estate as well, is the ones who jump into this just differently than how we're kind of growing with it. And I was wondering if you guys had some examples of new ways of thinking about this stuff. Paula, since we've been starting,
that's a tough one. I think one of the things for sure, I think is like the companies that David are talking about that sort of are looking at the whole life cycle of a building, right, and investing holistically from building the buildings all the way to operating them and so on and so forth. And I think they will come out as winners. I think there will be disruptive business model in real estate as well, where the people that take the life cycle view on this can actually make much better decisions and be much more profitable than the silo thinking that we're still struggling with. And then real estate is a very conservative industry. That's one thing I learned after entering this industry 6 years ago. I think we will see new business models like Airbnb, hotels.com, all these things that went into a very conservative industry and completely disrupted the business models. And I think that's slowly going to happen. I think WeWork was probably a good example of that. It may have been super poorly executed, or there's lots of other and very interesting things going on, right? But at least the model was right, and I think we'll see a lot more of that.
Well, it's amazing how many have emerged since WeWork, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many of these flex workplaces see the potential, and the people using them as well. I think they're doing quite well. I wait for the day that there's an overarching umbrella for all of them, so that you can go anywhere, so that you can't. It's not just this one location that you can go to, but you can go to any of them. But I kind of think that's coming, and I think Airbnb is already starting to make moves in that direction a little bit. So that's interesting. And you, Antonio, what are the most creative things you've been seeing, and the most kind of lucrative innovations happening with your technology, or with smart technologies in general?
Yeah, there are many examples. I made some repetitive, but everything started by energy, and after that you move to this new business model or new solutions. If I may take an example from another sector, this is in healthcare. It is also possible to use the same infrastructure we use for the energy savings to detect, for example, to make fault detection. How do you put a return of investment on that? Being able to prevent an accident, or prevent that someone that requires, maybe with mental challenges, that just leaves the building without nobody knowing.
Mm-hmm.
There's even a ratio about the radius and the time and the costs and the impact of someone leaving the building without knowing it in a healthcare institution. So there are, like you said, there are many things that are going to happen. Most of the things are already possible and are implemented. Is the minority, of course. But again, we're convinced that the way to get there is first make it simple for everybody. Let's tackle the first challenge. And based on that, and with that infrastructure that you're placing, you are able to go and take another directions based on the market, on your specific market.
Yeah, and I always talk a lot about that technology, right? It can be used for good, but it can also be used for evil or not so good, in the sense that technology, you don't want that to be used in the employment world, right? Where, Joe left to go home early. Okay.
That depends. I will say we found a way to recycle the data and to make a destruction certificate per day of the data. In that way, you're still delivering the value, but you are also recycling the data and giving a guarantee of that, so that the people are comfortable giving their information for one day. I mean, it is a mindset at the end of the day. We live. I wouldn't be able to live without my mobile phone right now, and I know I'm being tracked all over the place. So if someone is giving consent and is conscious about this in 24/7, 365, and you as an employee, you give consent to be tracked for specific purposes one day, and that data is going to be deleted, that can work, and that's something that is going to be happening, and is gonna take more relevance in the decision of the implementations and the kind of technology the employers want to use.
Yeah, which I think speaks to leadership, culture, communication, making sure that people feel safe with it. I think there was a university case in the papers the other day where the students were ripping off the occupancy sensors and the cameras because they didn't want to be monitored, and the technology actually wasn't even doing that. It was using infrared or whatever. Everything was anonymous, but they just didn't know. So
it is amazing, but like you said. And you're totally right. The technology can be used for good or for evil. It's like just take as example the cars. I mean, the cars we use that every day. In the right hands, is a perfect transportation tool, but in the wrong hands can create really catastrophes. Yeah. So you're totally right, and it's just indeed a mindset and making sure that the technology that the building owner of user selects gives that this kind of guarantees of the data. because indeed nobody would like to be tracked when somebody is going to the bathroom, for example. But we have cases that employees are tracked in a factory, for example. And at the end of the day, one of the employees had an accident and he fell down. He was unconscious, and everybody left the building. But you get an alert and say, "Okay, wait a minute. There's still one person inside the facility."
Yeah.
So for those purposes, if it is clear for the end user, it's clear for the owner of the building, and you can guarantee that the data is going to be used only for that and then destroyed, that's the way to move towards these kind of solutions.
Yeah. And what I love about the work that we're all doing right now in smart buildings is that those value cases are just constantly being born, on a daily basis. And I think it's so interesting to witness those, like what you said about an individual, that a notification comes when somebody is hurt or fell down. That's just a new value case for something that already exists. So you can start to extract more and more of those out of these technologies once you have it in place. And you, David, do you have some ideas of what you've seen that's creative, innovative, and lucrative?
Lucrative, yes.
Lucrative is important. That's how you get the whole industry to move.
I would say in terms of lucrative, I see the biggest potential basically twofold. One is optimization of all of it. So facility management, call outs, whole shebang of the building. And the second opens the window to invest in community and invest in experience. And I think that should be the trade-off. So whatever you save should be invested, in my eyes, in creating a better experience in the building, and subsequently also trying to create a community. And I think that's going to be a differentiator on the market in long term. And that opens the door for mixed use of the building, which we will need. So mix of flex, mix of co-working, and mix of long short-term leases, potentially even with the hospitality business. We should also start mixing things up within our own industry, looking at what hospitality is working, what's working in, let's say, offices, what's working in co-working, flexible, and be open to it, and look at the community too. So not just at your building, but maybe where do you fit within the community. And I think whoever is doing that is going to be extremely successful. For the rest, I think there will be laggards, but the good thing about real estate is it doesn't go away that easily. And there's always some value in it if you want to invest. And when the right person is going to come, it's going to be good.
Yeah, I can tell you one that we've witnessed. There's a building that we worked with that is it's a consultancy firm. It's very sensitive, so you can't necessarily have people just walking around there. But their consultants are out and about, 4 days a week, and then Fridays they come back to do their administration and debrief and all that stuff. So the office was kind of split into two, and based on that occupancy data, they could see exactly how much the utilization was needed and not. And what they did is they opened up kind of the more flex space, the more less secure, I guess you would call it, space, Monday through Thursday for a financial gain, because they rented it to people around the area who were just willing to buy coffee and sit there and work. And then on Fridays, they kick all those people out and they just move the wall, and their consultants have enough space to come in and do their administration and these types of things. We just saw it as so simple and so possible with the right communication, the right leadership, the right data. You can actually pull some revenue down on the space when it's not being used. Put a brand on it and get some usage. And there's companies now that are doing that for you, so you can just get it going. So that's a cool one. I see that we're pretty much out of time, guys. I really have enjoyed this. I enjoyed learning from all three of your companies. I think you guys are doing fantastic work. I would love to give you all a closing remark to maybe give a word of wisdom of how does one get started? You know, if I have a dumb building and I want to make it a little bit smarter, where do I go? And I know Antonio's answer. But let's go with you, Pale, to begin
Yeah,
with.
I think you know, if you think you'll know my answer too, you know, put in good occupancy sensors that can give you really granular data, can integrate with your BMS to help on the energy and show you all those patterns that can really help you create a better user experience and optimize your space utilization in a very energy efficient way. So you asked for it, and there's my pitch, Nicholas.
And how difficult is it to do that?
It's really very, very easy. I mean, it's very easy to configure, set it up, and start getting that intelligent data in and do action on it.
Yeah, great. Antonio, closing remarks?
Yeah, I would say that every building is unique, and it may not be necessary to add sensors at all. So the zero analysis is really important. So do that first as an owner of a user and understand what's the current situation. Try to reuse the current hardware, and if not, then move ahead to add hardware. But it can be really simple. It can be just adding some basic controllers to the electrical box and being able to get alerts from that. And next moving forward to another kind of sensoring, like Pale just said, occupancy, temperature, humidity, CO2, etc., etc.
Really nice. Thank you. David, as a consultant and as helping the leadership, what's your recommendation?
I would say start with data, but don't do it on your own. Get external advisors that will look what is your business strategy. If you're a landlord, what you want to achieve or where does it hurt the most. So if that's energy, then start there. If then move onwards slowly. But I would say you require data. So you will need to retrofit something to get patterns and then develop a business model where you want to go. And from that point onwards, maybe as Paul said and Anthony Slumber say, space is a service, long-term, short-term, healthy building, smart. I think you should aim for autonomous and healthy, but that's what I always say. So it has to make business sense as well. But I would say get the right partners. That would be my first thought, because it's complicated. It's not easy. I think also Antonio and Paula nicely pointed out today complementary things between software, hardware, what do you pick, which sensors. That's also very important. That's also where, let's say, you can turn to smart building certification. I'm sure, well, I've witnessed it myself. You can help and point out to the right direction. I think that's how people should look at it, and strategically.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, guys, thank you very much for this. Really appreciated this time together, and we'll be in touch soon on more exciting and great things.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Looking forward to it. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.